Good morning. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023. It is 10:05 a.m. This session is set to go to 11 a.m. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. This is a hybrid meeting for public virtual attendance. You may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. Commissioner Gary Edwards is excused for this meeting. Also in the boardroom, we have County Manager Ramiro Chavez and Public Works Director Jennifer Walker. And she's got other staff members here today who are going to be discussing Waste and Recovery Center reconfiguration project briefing. So Jennifer, would you like to introduce staff that are here today?
Chair. So with me today is Jeff Bickford. He's our solid waste manager. On Zoom is Dean Boning. I always say his name wrong. Benning. And he's our senior program manager, solid waste. And then we have Olivia Williams, who is with HDR, a manager with HDR who has a specialty in solid waste design infrastructure. So this is informational. Brings up the presentation. This is a continuation of what we've been working on for almost 6 years now. Back in 2017, the board authorized obligated funds for us to be able to put together a condition assessment for the solid waste facilities. Not only condition assessment, but then also identifying capital needs. And then in 2018, there was a draft of those results and recommendations that we presented to the board in July. And then in 2019, the infrastructure management plan was completed, and we basically used that plan to populate some of the improvements that we've done, for example, the flare, the SCADA system. We did some security improvements. Those were all based out of recommendations from the infrastructure management plan. And so some of the recommendations with specific to the Waste and Recovery Center have to do with the facility being built on a closed landfill, so there's settling that's happening. It was also a facility that was built in 2000, so with our population growth, the capacity for that facility, we are at capacity, and so we're looking at how do we do those upgrades. The reconfiguration recommendation is something we're going to go through detail of that, but it's to help us with eliminating some ongoing maintenance issues that we've had, allow for increasing capacity for the facility, improving our customer access, increasing, I would say, some safety there where we're eliminating the kind of commingling of our self-haulers and our commercial haulers and separating those out. And so with that, I just want to give you a little bit of background. Like, this is something that we've been working on and are at a point now based off of the analysis that we've done to come forward with our proposed recommendation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Good morning. So we engaged, after that initial study, we engaged HDR to prepare a Waste and Recovery Center master plan, which was actually completed in July of 2021. So in that planning process, we started out with some goals and objectives. The basic is to develop an overall comprehensive work site development that will look at the next 20 years from now, that takes into account recommendations from the capital facility plan that just referred to, in allowing us to provide a high level of public solid waste services for both the UTC haulers as well as self-haul customers. And some of the key points and goals and objectives is to upgrade our traffic flow, to reduce our queuing issues, which is the lineup, so hopefully get customers through more quickly, and to reduce potential traffic conflicts because we do have self-haul customers and the commercial en route curbside haulers. Basically, they're queuing up in the same lines, and so we try to get some separation between that for safety's sake. Of course, increase our safety and functionality of the facility, meet future and current regulatory requirements. Obviously, we have the old closed landfill there that we're responsible for continuing to monitor for minimally till 2030, but that's not going to go away at that point in time as well, because there's still going to be landfill gas being generated, leachate being generated, and settlement. And as Jennifer mentioned, increase our ability to deal with the customers over the next 20 years, because we are, particularly in the summertime and the weekends, we are at and above capacity, and we get some substantial lineups. And of course, provide budgetary capital cost estimates for future major expenditures. So you're probably familiar with what the work looks like. Basically, as you can see, to the west, intercity transit is basically, we're not really active with that. You have the dog park and closed loop park there in the west. The customers typically come in across the center from left to right, past the outbound scales. They come across the inbound scales, then with the self-hauls going over to the self-haul tipping area, and the commercial haulers going forward to the transfer building, backing up and tipping into that building. Mechanics are received just to the east of the self-haul area. And then many of our customers utilize a second access point, which is coming off of Hogan Bay, which goes down and fronts along I-5. And that takes them to the Hazel House and our recycling area. That area down below that you see where it says Hazel House recycling area in the transfer station building is not over old solid waste landfill. It's actually back, that's one area in that site that's actually back to virgin ground. So as part of the thought is looking to maybe move some of these facilities that overlie the old landfill back down to that. So in this master plan, we have some basic design criteria. Again, minimize our traffic crossings where commercial and resident and self-haul cross each other. Minimize our queuing. Limit the infrastructure on top of the old closed landfill. Again, settlement's been a major issue out there. If you do go out, it's very visual. If you go and look at our inbound scale, if you happen to go up there sometime and see how many times we've had to pave the ramp because the ramp keeps settling. So it's quite interesting to see layer after layer. But the building itself is on piles. Our scale houses that hold them steady, but everything else around it settles. But it does create issues. Existing infrastructure would remain under this design criteria. Hazel House, the actual transfer station building, which is the main area, and then of course it wouldn't be touching on the park, closed loop park, or the park and ride facility. Slide. So as part of this master plan, they came up with 4 potential layout options. I'm not going to go over all of them, but the first 2 options, A and B, still had some of the facilities happening over the old closed landfill. And so they were, while there were options, they were less desirable. Basically, options C and D, and I'll kind of go over what those look like here shortly, were the key. They both limited the infrastructure over the old closed landfill. As I'll show you, they separate the commercial vehicle truck traffic from the self-haul traffic completely, which is again a key goal. So let's just go ahead and we're excited to move forward with C and D, and I'll detail that a little bit more.
Jeff, if I may for just a moment. So on slide 5, we identified, here's the design criteria, right? Here's what we're valuing, here's what we want to see. The options then, we took the 4 different conceptual design plans and ran those through and said, okay, well, how do they meet up with this criteria that we've identified? And so this table is just showing the evaluation of that and why we then moved and eliminated A and B and went to C and D. And so now we're going to that next level.
And the way we got there, besides, and how we got to this table here, was we held a peer review and we received feedback. Initially, on April 5th of 2021, master plan, all the options were peer reviewed by not only public works staff, but we got together a group that included representatives from Spokane County, Snohomish, Adams, Kittitas, and Lewis counties to look at all these 4. And it was the consensus of that group to eliminate A and B because they didn't quite meet the full criteria that were shown in that table previously, and to look at moving, narrow it down to basically options C and D. Additionally, the SWAC reviewed this exact same thing at their May 5th and their September 1st meetings of that year and came to that same conclusion. So basically they agreed that let's abandon moving forward with putting more effort into looking at A and B and move forward with spending our time looking at options C and D. So basically, based upon the peer review and the SWAC feedback, we narrowed those options down to those two. And then next slide, we'll show you what those two look like. So option C is probably easier to see on your paper here. What this does is it moves it has the self-haul customers coming down along the southern access point along I-5 with new scales, inbound scales being installed just to the east of Haza House and you'll see this little zigzag line here. It's with a Z-wall. So it'd be similar to what we have right now where the customers back up and tip off a wall into shipping containers. And then those will be compacted and hauled away. So in a similar manner, the organics drop-off would be to the far right. To the north where it is right now. And then traffic would loop around and outbound scales down in that lower area would be added. So this would run all our self-haul customers through this loop down in this lower area. The commercial customers would continue to use the old routing. They come in the main gate, come in our existing inbound and outbound scales, and tip into the transfer station building from the north side. So it gives that separation of traffic. Additionally, it was recommended that we since more of our activity would be down here, we have a consolidated administration building. The building right now that we're in is a 25-year-old mobile home type thing. It's getting pretty decrepit.
I agree.
So, so we would consolidate with the new building there. The Hazel House would remain as is, and the recycling area would maybe enhanced, but be in the same location. So that differs from option D. Option D is very similar. It does, once again, it brings that separation of self-haul versus the commercial. The main difference is instead of the Z-wall where you're tipping directly into containers, it would be an expansion of the existing transfer station building to the west. So it'd be actually adding on to that building and creating basically an extension of the tipping floor further to the west. So the commercial would continue to tip off the wall into the north side of the transfer station building. Self-haul customers would drive up and tip onto a flat floor. So which is actually a safer routing because you're not going to have people over a large drop-off space. They tip, they drive away, and then that waste is just moved with the front end loader and then moved aside and then loaded into a compactor and taken away.
Versus in C, customers backed up, tipped, tossed into containers. Those containers were then picked up and moved and then taken to
Correct.
the
So
tipping floor. So we're touching it less also from C to D.
And additionally, in option C with the you're tipping off a wall into the container, that container is then top compacted. And then hauled, it will be hauled directly to the intermodal transfer down in Centralia versus the waste that's in this building would be put through the compactor and hauled away. So you actually end up with less truck hauls going away in option D than you would in option C because you're going to have more compacted loads and more tons leaving per container. So the next slide talks about again, the criteria that we were looking at and some of the advantages and disadvantages of between options C and D. First off is improving the safety and risk management. Option D was definitely preferable because you're not having customers back up. Because it has happened where customers go over. And I hate to joke about it, but it does happen. So from a safety perspective, definitely much safer because they're not near a fall hazard.
I've
they
also
would-
had them back into like their spotter and
Yeah.
recently,
And,
so.
and from past, this is a quick aside, from past experience at a transfer station I used to deal with back in Salem, I worked for Marion, or, a husband was getting his wife back, and she didn't see, pinned him against the wall. When the people yelled, pull forward, that person flipped over the wall and died. I mean, so it's stuff, there is a safety issue with tipping the walls. So there's increased safety in
Way
option
to take
D.
it to that next level.
I know. I'm just trying to bring some reality. It is an issue. Sorry about bringing that up.
It's a good thing we have not experienced that in our
That's right.
transfer station,
It's
just for the public
potentially dangerous.
perspective.
As far as the goal of relocating the infrastructure off the closed landfill, both of these two options meet that goal. It definitely increases our waste and customer capacity because the Z-wall is designed for additional spaces as well as the, expanding the transfer station building will allow us to move more customers through more quickly as well. So that satisfies in both of those scenarios. Each of those two separates self-haul and commercial traffic. As far as option D, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, would be fewer hauls away because the material would be compacted versus just top compacted. It would go through the actual compactor. So it would reduce vehicle traffic, therefore carbon emissions as well. It also increases, option D, increases the potential for recovered recyclables. And how that applies is that if it's tipped onto a floor, and moved by a loader, so if they see tires or an appliance in that waste, they could set it aside and capture it. But as the material's dumped into a container and you never get the chance. It's taken, stuff gets thrown on top of it. You don't have the opportunity. So it does increase our opportunity to recover additional recyclables. This is a concept that could potentially, option D, provide infrastructure for education and outreach. And what this is, and I've seen this in a couple of transfer stations where in the administrative buildings where they'll have a conference room that has like a glass window that overlooks the transfer station floor, and where they've had, they can do, have classes or seminars or, if you have tours, it's a safe place for people to see what's going on without being near all that moving equipment. I've seen it in Hillsborough and a couple other locations where we've had meetings there, and it's very educational where you can actually see the goings on and how it works. We don't know if that would necessarily happen here, but there's an opportunity. Lower construction costs. Design C, as we'll talk about shortly, is less expensive initially as far as the actual initial building of it, but there's the option D actually has lower additional operating costs as compared to option C, and I'll talk about that here right now. So based upon, and this is all of this was put together in the final report for the conceptual master plan. And then staff took that information and we performed a cost benefit analysis between these two. So go option C is less expensive to build initially by about $5 million approximately. And I do want to mention that the costs that are shown here were ones that were estimated back in 2021. So though at that time they did inflate them because it was immediately post-COVID. So they actually put the substantive inflation factors in there just to account for that. So, as we move forward, these cost estimates will.
Yeah, they're still at
be
planning,
revised.
they're planning level cost
Exactly.
estimates, yeah.
So, but then we actually posed this to Republic Services. So, if we were to do this option or this option, what would be the difference between these two operationally from additional equipment, additional labor that you might need to operate in these ways if we were to go to either of these two types of facilities. So what they identified was that for option C, there's definitely over $1.5 million worth of additional equipment that they would need to do that compared to what they're doing right now in our existing conditions. And in option D, which is basically an excavator and another loader and a couple other some other additional trucks for moving all those boxes that they would have. In option D, that was just basically a front end loader, because you'd have additional floor space that they would need to move that waste. So there's definitely additional capital equipment that would be needed between the one design. Also, for option C, there's additional labor and other expenses that would be on an annual basis that would be required to do that. There's at least 3 additional staff that would be needed, additional spotters, additional equipment operator, as well as that reflects the difference in the extra hauls that would be necessary because you're hauling lighter loads. So there's determined how many additional loads that would require based upon a lighter payload so that added up to about $500,000 a year. So basically putting up the 20-year, based upon the 20-year design life of the building that you look at, while option C initially is less expensive to build out front. Over the period of time, actually, option C is more expensive, and actually the turning point is about year 9, and basically after that, it becomes option C becomes more expensive, and long term it will continue to be so because of those additional ongoing labor costs, particularly. Which brings us ultimately to our recommendation, and we brought this analysis to the SWAC at their January meeting, and they came to essentially the same conclusion as staff had come to, as recommending, is that they felt that we should move forward with the design outlined in option. Move forward, we'll be working with HDR. Basically, the next step would be performing a pre-design before going out with the actual full this package for the design of plans and specs, is to really narrow down, get it focused down on the full scope. Because right now it's fairly generalized, but we want to really nail down the full scope of work and the design parameters that we would use to put out a request for qualifications for basically the full design of project plans and specifications, which of course would come back to the board to go out for an RFQ at that point in time. And then further on beyond that would be an RFQ and then ultimately contract for design services. And a basic look at the potential timeline. Essentially, if we continue to move forward in the second quarter with the pre-design, get a designer on board by near the end of the year. Essentially, it'd be with assuming things go well, no major hitches, it would be tentatively end of 2026, early 2027 before that would be ready to roll. One of the key things that will be important to put in the design aspect and in the construction is phasing, project phasing, and this is going to be really critical because all of these changes will be happening around that facility. So it's probably going to take a little longer in the construction than it might, just because you're having to work around, a facility that's open essentially 363 days of the year. So, don't have weekends where you can go in there and do things around, where you'd have no activity. And that's what I've got to say about that. And I'm willing to hear any questions, answer any questions.
All of the costs would be paid by tipping fees. It's why we have the fund balance that we have, because we've had deferred maintenance, and so we've covered that.
SWAC.
I have had meetings for the board, I think this whole year that correlate with SWAC, so I haven't been able to attend SWAC, yeah. So when this presentation was done. I think one time it was like I had a solid waste, I don't remember, it was a public works briefing correlating with SWAC.
So it's Jennifer's fault.
Yeah.
What did you say? I can hear it.
It's your fault.
Oh, you're welcome.
Can you just spell out a little more when you're saying that there's going to be less truck hauling because you're going to compact what's on the floor, and now you're not compacting what's on the floor?
Certainly. So in option C, basically they're going to put transfer trailers at the tipping wall, and people will dump their garbage into that, and then they would pack it down with a excavator or a backhoe to tamp it down this way, which the best they can usually do is maybe get about 22 to 23 tons. If they're really lucky, 25 tons for that trailer. Whereas in the option D, where they're tipping it on the floor, that material will be picked up with the front end loader, put into the compactor. I think you get 30 tons per container per load. So otherwise you're losing about 5 to 6 tons per truck haul that you go out there. So you're gonna have to, given that you're gonna have a certain amount of garbage, you'll have number more truck hauls because you're having less payload per container. So it's more efficient in option D where you're expanding the building and be able to compact it versus using the Z-wall tipping.
And where does that savings manifest? Like, where's the money for the payment for the transportation from that not tipping fees?
Same thing, yeah. It'd be part of our contract with the hauler.
Yes, yes. So instead of paying for the top loading and hauling it however many times, we're paying for.
Yeah, because it's
the larger-
transportation is one of the items, transportation and disposal is one of the items that, is part of our new contract. So it just means more hauls, which means more dollars that we'll be paying to Republic for those additional hauls. So that's where there's, there's a little bit of a savings from that perspective. So that by compacting, getting the largest payload you can get per container.
Is there, so. Asking a hard question. So the analysis that leads to the conclusion that this is gonna save money because of these additional equipment and operational costs. Is there any element to that that's, like, is that pretty much like hard numbers, like high level of confidence, or is there any amount of like speculation about those numbers in terms of your, kind of like you said with the education, it's like, well, we don't know that we're really gonna ever do that, but it presents opportunity that maybe you could do, like that kind of speculation. Is any of that built into these numbers of like, I think you said you asked Republic about what their staffing and like, is there any puffing there or, cause like in terms of us making a decision based on this analysis and then it turns out that those savings were illusory or those projected costs were illusory and it really would have been cheaper to do option C.
And you are correct, I mean, we did ask Republic because they are going to be our operator.
Mm-hmm.
In this time window. It seemed very reasonable. Again, it was the additional equipment and staff. There's only a few items that really are in that. But so
There were some assumptions
there
made.
are some assumptions.
And we just
certainly.
extrapolated out, okay, what are we doing now, right? Because we're tapping it down now versus what's going on the floor. So we know what that looks like. We know the percentage of each, and we just kind of, it was just extracted out over
So
time.
you can't necessarily say, I agree, you can't say that it's exact, again, because this is conceptual.
But like when they say they need, like, for example, additional equipment, design C needs $1.6 million worth and design D needs $750,000 worth. And is that pretty much I don't know what all is
That
involved.
seems reasonable. I mean, they're a for-profit company, right? So they're gonna be looking at trying to be as efficient as possible. So they're not gonna try to add in a whole bunch more equipment that they don't.
And if you're looking for the specific items, pieces of equipment, I know Dean has that. I don't have that with me right now, but they actually identified what the pieces of equipment were and the costs that they associated with that were basically going rate costs that we see right now for those pieces of equipment.
Olivia, do you want to add anything just based off of your kind of experience in
Sure.
this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this type of analysis at this planning level is as accurate as it can be with respect to assumptions. The specific pieces of equipment that Jeff noted, have actual costs currently, and in reviewing with the operators where the additional staff would be required for material handling, customer safety and spotting. Those are based on actual salaries with benefits, et cetera. So I think at this planning level, those costs are as accurate as they can be.
So this project does not qualify for progressive design build.
It could be.
Sorry?
Progressive design build. It could be because I think what the key element will be the phasing during construction. They could qualify if we were to approach this on in terms of designing the administrative building while doing some other work. It could. So good
We're
idea.
starting to look into
We could
it.
explore that. I think tomorrow I will give you a perspective as to my experience
Let Romero
related.
be the guinea pig.
Tomorrow I will give you my perspective as to how that conversation went at the state level.
Your goal being to capture the cost.
Well,
The
the
timing.
timeline, right? You know, we're seeing the timeline and it's 2026 when, you know, really we would even really,
The key is the timeline.
so,
Reduce I think right now you have 2.5 years of construction. And that really brings the benefit.
yeah, that's what I was, because it's fourth quarter of 2026 when it would be completed, so seeing if, you know, that timeline can be shortened, you know, there's benefit and cost savings as well to that.
We
If
can certainly explore that.
I know there was a transfer station in Seattle that was constructed before progressive design build was allowed in Washington, so it was full design build. And then there was that was a King County facility. No, excuse me, that was a City of Seattle facility, and then they also had one that was GCCM model, both of which they considered pretty successful, you know, pros and cons with each, but I'm not aware of a facility of a similar facility that's been developed now that progressive design build is allowable in Washington, but
Right, but it's similar.
I would think it would be an
Similar
appropriate.
nuances on the design build, progressive design build. It has the same concepts. Yeah.
What's the difference with GCCM and progressive design build?
Progressive design build requires that you have one contract with a design builder. It just provides some flexibility in the process, some off-ramps, if you will, if you can't get to a guaranteed construction price. GCCM still allows for two separate contracts to the owner with the contractor and with the designer. But the contractor is engaged earlier on so that you have that input throughout, and so you can recognize some of the same benefits. It's contracting is the main difference.
The progressive design build at least is attractive for the county at this point and tomorrow because we encompass the whole project, the courthouse in single umbrella. Okay.
I'm wondering if we can see the fund balance, right? And
The fund balance?
yeah, for the tipping fees, right? I know that it's a
It's
healthy,
picked at all the time about how we're not spending money.
I know,
Very significant. I'll venture to say it's probably a little north of 24.
I know it's healthy, but you know, kind of
I'm
just.
thinking Karen's watching this potentially,
Hey,
so-
Karen.
unless she got called into a
It
meeting.
is the end and fine balance of the.
And so just, you know, like with this, you know, we're just seeing that projection, you know, kind of like Robin does, like that, you know,
The 10-year
the
financial plan.
10-year projection, right? With this impact, with the recommendation, I think that would kind of give us a mindset financially, right? Not that, it's not a healthy balance, but at least it can just give us an overview. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
First comment, first of all, I'm glad to see that in option D, you have a plan for a second compactor. And that has been one of the highest risks that we have been facing in the last few years. And, the compactor breaks, and then we're just idling until we have somebody to come and fix it. And then struggling with the vendor to haul more waste than they could. So that, at least from my humble perspective, option D really addresses the long-term needs of that and provides a little bit of a safety net to have a second compactor. And, by expanding the footprint of the transfer station really is something we need to consider. The question that I have is, when we look at the initial statements you made, Jeff, and maybe Jennifer's, the work has reached the the capacity, we're looking at long term. How the proposal of consolidating the satellite stations on the South County plays a role on the overall capacity of the workout. All that has been taken into account in the assessment that you have made?
To some degree, it's also kind of what we tried to balance in terms of what's that level of service like for queuing? So for example, are we gonna try to design something and build capacity that we would say you have no wait? Like, I don't think that that's reasonable, right? So, but do we want people to have to wait an hour? No. So trying to find that right balance. So I would say to some degree that's been incorporated in. And also, because if we think about where the growth is happening, it's happening certainly north, but South County, Yelm area. And then also just being able to provide additional services that we don't offer now at those. But some of that will take vehicles and pressure off of our north facility if we have something in the south.
How about, okay. The, on either of the two, maybe on the option D, maybe this will be answered at the time we went to deeper into the design. I couldn't understand the traffic flow from the commercial haulers because it really addresses the tipping fees, the individuals who come in and being serviced at the facility. But considering the access, the current access to the transfer station is to the north, how the traffic flow and the conflict with the public haulers will be, because right now you do have a Y. I mean, straight the commercial haulers and then you go to the left for the tipping fees. How that works on that? I don't know if you have the answer right now or that will be answered down the road.
As you mentioned, right now, self-haul and commercial, they queue up right one behind each other. They both go across the inbounds. The commercial haulers will go straight, once they get past the inbound scale, go straight down to the transfer station, as well as self-haul customers with tip trailers. So we do have that interaction, and sometimes, people don't know how to back up their trailers that hold up traffic as well. And then the rest go, spin around and go over to the public tipping area. In both of the two new scenarios, the commercial haulers just do the same thing they've been doing the whole time. They come in the same place, they go to the same inbound scale, tip, outbound, and then everybody else, including customers with tip trailers, goes the other way. So you get that complete separation of the self-haul folks. So again, it's just, from a safety perspective, it's always made me nervous when, this person in a little teeny truck and they're behind a drop box truck with, up and we've been fortunate not to have a conflict or accident so far, but.
What is this on the map? What is the green area? According to the key, it says removal/landscape areas. It's highlighted green, but what's it gonna be?
Certainly. So right now, that actually is where the current public tipping area is. So there's a Z-wall and a big drop is likely, you probably don't want to keep that large drop off up there as it would just get filled. To make it level, because then it becomes storage space. As you'll notice in both those two options as well, the organics area will now be where they store their empty shipping containers, which currently is down in that lower area. So they'll store their empties up there. And then the green area again it would just be for vehicle storage, et cetera. But they would need to be filled to be level, because right now it's got a large drop off, and which is also a fall hazard. So we'd want to just put some soil in there just to smooth that out. So it'd be usable space. Otherwise, it's not really usable.
And that's gonna, and like something that, I guess I'm not sure what all's moving where, but this is gonna address the issue you said about trying to get operations off the fill area and onto the solid ground.
Correct. Yeah, because right now, so basically the only thing really that's up there that would be really active would be the inbound and outbound scales for now would be just for the commercial. So we currently have 2 inbounds, 2 outbound scale houses. We'd only be utilizing 1 because your volume of traffic there is going to be minimized. So we just keep 1, pair of employees up there, and then we transfer the other 2 down to the lower area with the new
So is
scale.
it still gonna keep dropping, but it's just gonna be slower, or?
It'll still slowly drop, but the road will. The building itself, those hold steady because they're on piles. So that way the buildings don't tip and the scales don't tip, but yeah, there'll still be some maintenance with that, but it's much less than what we have right now, because we have a shop, we have our admin trailer, we have our environmental operations techs are in a trailer, and again, this stuff just, it's problematic. It creates a lot of maintenance issues. One of the biggies in particular is that public tipping area and those tipping walls is with the filament, the walls are now not vertical anymore. We've had an engineer look at it. They're safe, but they are skewing and separating, so because that is not on piles, and we want to get the public off of the top of that wall into a safer situation.
We'll follow up with the 10-year plan. I will say that we do have programmed in a little over $12 million for this project. So when you've looked at the 10-year plans for solid waste, that's been incorporated in. So it'll get adjusted some, right, as we refine.
Still significant enough.
There is.
On option D, question, I think there's an attempt to the access road to be on native soil. So we avoid the settlements that we have been experiencing over the last few decades. But the question that I have is, right when you have parallel to the current inbound scales, and that's what I think we had the issues with settlement. Is that native soil that you have in here, or will we continue to have some of that?
The existing inbound scale? I know, that's, you're up on the road.
Yeah. So the access road that's proposing here parallel to that, almost next to it, will that be exposed to the same settlements?
Oh, wait, I see what you're saying. This is like where the outbound scale comes by. Oh, no, that would be built up over, actually, that would be over the original ground and built up. So it'd be a lot of fill that we put there, but
Okay, but the intent is to
that
have
would not
a.
be over, yeah, that would not be over garbage.
One last question, and I know you can answer this. Is, will there be an opportunity for the vendor to claim change conditions on the contract that is taking place here in May?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we welcome that because we believe this is gonna cost them less to operate. Long term.
Well, thank you. If there's no more questions, it is 10:47. We are.
So just next steps, I believe the next steps we'll see a request for proposals at some point. Is that the intent?
Well, the next step will be for the design piece of the HDR, just to basically generate an RFQ.
But for the board, yes.
Before
For
the board, so
board,
then
that
the
would
board will be
be,
next steps for the board to see a request for proposals.
Oh, an RFQ.
Okay.
yes. That's not,
Are-
you're
are-
not getting that next week or even next month, but
Walker.
This fall, this fall probably.
I was hoping for tomorrow.
unless let's see what you find out for the progressive design bill.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.